Thank you for joining me today, Susan. I'm really thankful that you're going to be here answering a lot of these questions that I have. And I'm really interested in learning more about what you have to offer and your knowledge and expertise about this area. So please tell me a little bit about why you got into mental health.
A lot of people have asked me that question, and I think it's a really good and fair question. I always knew that I wanted to be in the sciences. I wanted to be an ear surgeon, then I wanted to be an astronaut, but I didn't like gore and I had really bad motion sickness. So I had to look for something else. And when I was a sophomore in high school, I read Freud for the first time, The Ego and the Id. And I was totally captivated and fascinated by it. And I was looking for a profession where I would never get bored. And I thought the mind would be an area where I would never get bored. And at the time, I didn't really know, I hadn't been in my own therapy as a child, so I didn't know, I knew everybody had issues, but I didn't know I had traumas or anything like that for a while. So yes, my own interest in healing myself unconsciously, I think, was also present for that. And I've always had a service orientation. I always felt like my life would be better spent in the service to other people. And I really like the idea of being able to help people with their mental health.
Thank you. Question about the PTSD. When I grew up and there was a lot of television talking about PTSD, it was always in reference to military personnel coming back from war or just coming out of some sort of serious event. But it's a whole lot bigger than that, isn't it?
Well, that's how most people know PTSD. And initially in movies and news broadcasts, that's how I think a lot of us heard about PTSD, which was a term actually coined in 1973. But if you look at the statistics of veterans versus other populations, there's actually 5 times as many people with PTSD from childhood traumas than there are from veteran related traumas. And that's not at all to minimize the service of the men and women in the military and their suffering, which can be profound. And I have actually treated veterans as well as people with what we call complex trauma. So complex trauma happens when people grow up with a lot of trauma in their childhood, which is often, but not always, at the hands of their family. Can also be neighbors or church groups or other groups that they're involved with. But the idea is that in complex trauma, the trauma gets sort of developmentally embedded into the organism and creates a lot of suffering. And it's harder to get over than, say, a single incident trauma, like you had a happy upbringing and then at 25 you were in a terrible car wreck and that was awful and traumatizing. But usually healing from that kind of event is faster than healing from sort of chronic childhood trauma.
Thank you. How would I know if I have PTSD? How would one know if they have it?
When people have what I call florid PTSD, or sort of like very extreme symptoms of it, it's hard to miss. It's hard to miss because it's characterized by intrusive symptoms. So we're talking severe nightmares or flashbacks, or nightmares that are flashbacks, intruding into your daily life, disrupting your sleep, disrupting your ability to stay present in certain situations. It's also characterized by what they call numbing and avoidance. So avoidance would be consciously or sometimes unconsciously avoiding situations that will trigger or potentially trigger your trauma. And then numbing out, or just numbing, but what we call numbing out is dissociating. Sometimes physical areas of the body will actually have less sensation with them. When people are avoiding trauma, the body has a lot of ways of protecting itself. And eventually these things come to people's attention, or sometimes they come to people's attentions in a very dramatic way.
Very interesting. And so with that discussion, is PTSD curable? I mean, is it, and I mean, this is going to be a huge question, because is it curable? How long does it take? And is there a magic pill, basically?
Okay, well, first of all, there's no magic pill. We know there's no magic pill. There's a lot of studies that have been done that are continuing to be done on pharmacology and PTSD, and now not just pills, but electrical stimulation, other things that are helpful. But also what we know is that, like, if you have depression associated with PTSD, the only thing that's been shown to work is really psychotherapy. So the studies looked at psychotherapy and medication, medication alone, and medication and psychotherapy, and the only one that really worked was either psychotherapy or medication and psychotherapy. We know that depression is treatment resistant if it's related to PTSD. We have medications that can help with nightmares. We have medications that can help with anxiety. But we don't have, like, if you're depressed and you take a pill, it can bring you and keep you in a normal mood. That's not true with PTSD. I am losing track of the other questions.
That's all right. The other was I said that was a very large question. I apologize. So, like, how long does PTSD last? Like, how long until you might be cured?
It's really variable. Unfortunately, there's two myths out there among clinicians. And one of the myths is that PTSD is not curable. And a lot of therapists are telling their clients, you have to live with this. Or I heard one therapist said to a client, how'd they say, you have to make PTSD your friend and learn to walk with it. And my client was horrified and said, I don't want PTSD. PTSD is not my friend, and I don't want to live with it forever. And I felt the same way. I went through PTSD, an explosion of PTSD in my 40s. And let me tell you, if somebody told me I had to live with that for the rest of my life, I might have felt like I don't want to live. So I never want to give people that message. I come from a place of believing that everything is treatable and potentially curable. Here's the problem with PTSD, what I found in my own healing and working with my clients. There's many dimensions to the human being. Psychotherapy only addresses the verbal dimension, the thinking dimension, and if you're on medication, maybe a physical dimension. But I come from a yogic model of the koshas, which describes 5 dimensions of the human being, kind of like Russian nesting dolls sitting inside of each other. And trauma is like a sword that penetrates through all 5 dimensions. So that's the physical body, the energy body, which is something we don't really have a lot of awareness of in Western medicine. We have a cognitive mind, which is a very popular realm for people to work in with PTSD. There's a wisdom mind that has to do with maybe, Jungian psychoanalysis or some sort of deeper wisdom-based treatment. And then we have something called the bliss body or the flow body or the love body, which is kind of like where we experience our connection to spirit or all things divine. And that is also wounded very profoundly in PTSD. In fact, all attachment structures are wounded with PTSD. So in order to fully heal, we really need to address all of those structures, which is why I'm a PTSD therapist, but sometimes I also work as a PTSD coach, where people might be in a treatment with another treater as their therapy, but I am there specifically to help work on all these dimensions of PTSD and help them work on healing themselves. I have seen many people with very profound traumas get to a place where they do not meet the criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder.
It's very informative. Thank you. I just have one final question. If you can speak directly to someone who's scared to go through this, what can you kind of say to them?
That's a really profoundly good question. Thank you for asking it. That fear is universal, and of course, the more trauma that somebody's sitting on, the more fear they're going to have about dealing with it. So we have little t traumas. Sometimes you hear us talk about little t traumas and big T traumas. Little t traumas might be like a bad breakup, or if you're a kid, not getting invited to somebody's birthday party. Big T traumas are the things that are generally accepted to cause PTSD. So very bad car accidents, very severe abuse growing up, a very catastrophic earth event that you're caught in the middle of, and maybe you lose your house or something like that. Those are the big T traumas. As I mentioned earlier, PTSD is characterized by avoidance, right? That's what's hard about this disorder, is I sometimes call it a disease of avoidance. Like the body mind wants you to avoid that trauma and avoid getting upset so that you can continue to function. The problem with that is if you want to really heal it and not just manage it, you actually have to go into the belly of the trauma and let it fully release through all the layers, at which point it dissipates completely. But that journey in is very scary. And you need a really good guide and somebody who is able to kind of contain you and the trauma and themselves to take that journey with you. And most therapists, quite honestly, are not up to that task. That's why I'm a big believer in trauma as a specialty. And trauma is a specialty for me and for many of my colleagues. So what I would say to those people is find a treater who can really take you on that journey and has the chops to do that and the qualifications to do that. And I wrote a whole blog on that. But we could talk more about that at another time. But yeah, it's scary. And I would say, though, the dividends are really worth it. Pardon me. Treatments can vary. You asked about length of treatment. It could be 5 years, it could be 10 years, it could be 20 years. But at the end of that time, it's over. If you don't get it treated, it will live in your body mind forever until death. And it may actually start to give rise to other problems with mental and physical health.
Thank you for sharing today, Susan. It's very informative, and I look forward to meeting with you again.